Thank you very much, Chris. So in this session, kind of illustrates an important strategy overall for scaling up carbon captures, which we need to be deploying the technologies that we have today that achieve commercial demonstration, which you just heard from Chris. Petronova is a great example of that. And I just meant to add quickly, Tim Thomas had travel issues yesterday, and I was reminded in Chris's talk that this morning I neglected to mention MHI sponsorship of our breakfast. So I'll do that now. I don't know if Tim's arrived. But MHI played a critical role in the Petronova project. Bill Brown is the CEO of Net Power. He'll be next. You've already heard from Julio and others references to Net Power. Many of you in the room have already also visited his facility, which was a project, is a project in development. They've had a very exciting milestone achieved here in the last few weeks that got a lot of press attention. I think most of you have probably seen it, which is that successful first fire. I'm sure he'll talk about that. This is technology which is next generation, capable, is being demonstrated now with gas, has the potential and an interest on the part of Net Power to demonstrate it with coal, potentially in my own state of North Dakota. And so this is, I think, an exciting example of what's on the forefront. So we're very pleased to have you, Bill, at a very busy time in your life right now. So thank you for making the trip to Wyoming to join us.
Great. I'd like to thank all of you for everything that you have done, because we at Net Power stand on the shoulders of so many people here. So many people here have created an environment, created technology, created opportunity that we at Net Power are trying to exploit. Net Power, when we first started our power plant, or tried to start our power plant about a month ago, we pressed the button. Boom. Nothing happened. We pressed it again. Nothing happened. And we kept hammering the keyboard for 4 days, and nothing happened. Meanwhile, the group from Toshiba that designed the turbine, they came out of their separate room and started working with all the Net Power people on how do we solve this problem. Finally, we took the cover off of the combustor. You see, this combustor is unique, not only because it can burn natural gas with a large CO2 concentration, but it's also the very first combustor that's ever used laser ignition. And so when that combustor arrived on site, the people from Toshiba looked at it and they saw the laser igniter and they said, I'm not touching it. Will you? No. No one aimed the laser igniter. Meanwhile, it was a great team building exercise because the Toshiba people and the Net Power people came together to solve problems. We had our first fire. And today, we're far ahead of schedule in all the testing that we're doing, which is fantastic. But part of that came through that team building exercise. And therein lies a lesson to us. Now, what I'd like to show you, obviously this is an aerial photo of our site. There's still some construction going on. That's an old photo. But several things are happening here. If you notice, this doesn't look too much like a power plant site. Across the bottom, that strip across the bottom, we call it pump row. Those are pumps and compressors. Off the left, you've got a cooling tower. You have 3 white buildings. The building in the upper right is our PDC. The building in the middle, in the center middle, is our turbine shed. And the building to the left, the white building to the left, is where we're testing our combustor. You see the entire plant is operating. The turbine in that middle shed is spinning. But that combustor, for the moment, we're venting the flue gas around the turbine so that we can really put the combustor through its paces. We, as some reporter quoted me, and I was just joking with the reporter, I said, I hope they break it. The point here is that because we're not putting the flue gas through the turbine, we can actually stress this combustor so that we can really understand how the combustor operates. We can actually stress the entire cycle so that we can understand how the cycle operates without having to worry about the latency of the turbine. Now, what are we doing going to commercial? Well, first of all, let's look at what we have on the site. The combustor we're testing on the site is a 1-to-1 scale of the full-scale combustor. So we are testing the full-scale combustor on our site. The combustor is the most idiosyncratic, art-driven technology we have. Everything else on that site, with the exception of the turbine, I'll talk about that in a minute, but everything else on that site comes from suppliers that can provide the full-scale units. Compressors, pumps, water separators. That's all the suppliers can do full-scale. We're blessed, because we're a CO2 cycle, that people like Occidental Petroleum have a huge amount of experience in compressing and pumping and pushing CO2 all around pipelines. And that experience of moving CO2 around has been very valuable to us. Now that takes us to the turbine. The turbine shell that's sitting there is a 200 megawatt turbine shell. Our full-scale turbine will be 500 megawatt thermal. The turbine shell sitting there is the size of a Chevy Suburban. The full-scale turbine will be only half again as much. Very, very compact system. So the scale of the turbine shell is only 2.5 to 1. We essentially, because we're driving a 200 megawatt turbine shell with a 50 megawatt thermal combustor, it's akin to firing up a V8 engine with only 2 spark plugs. It'll run, maybe, but it's not the most efficient thing. But we're getting all the data from this because we want to pull everything at full scale without having to take the balance of plant to full scale, which would have been very expensive. Now, we know we are targeting 2021 COD for the full-scale plant, and this summer, we will be doing a design freeze, taking all the data we've gotten out of our plant operation, and we'll do a design freeze for the full-scale plant and build it. What does our plant look like? What do we take in and put out? On this Sankey chart here, you see we take in $40 million worth of natural gas, and we throw out $90 million worth of electrons. That's what basically a combined cycle, 60% efficient combined cycle facility does. Takes in 40, converts it to 90. There's some O&M wrapped around it, but that's it. In addition to putting that out on the right, we also put out other things by virtue of our being an oxy-combustion cycle. We put out, up there, nitrogen. We put out 4 million tons of nitrogen every year. We put out 70,000 tons of argon every year. We put out 890,000 tons of CO2 every year. What do they turn into? Well, initially, the nitrogen, we're assuming $8 a ton there, but we can get for liquid nitrogen, we've got supply contracts where we could probably get close to $50 a ton for liquid nitrogen. But those markets are only so deep. We know we can get argon at $300 a ton, easy. Again, those markets are only so deep. But we also know that we can get $15 a ton for CO2. $15 a ton as long as the eye can see, because $15 a ton CO2 makes this economic for enhanced oil recovery. What happens in our market, those gas markets up above, will ultimately cause those markets to go away or to be cheap. We know that. But the beauty of having the support of those gases at the top initially allows us to go through our learning curve and cheapen our construction in our plant in similar ways as we're seeing Petronova talk about how they can cheapen their plant. Serial number 2, serial number 3, serial number 4. Those all cheapen it. So now if we look at the next slide, you can see, let's start with the 4th column from the left. To orient you on the slide, the blue part of the bar is capital cost, the green part of the bar is fuel cost, and the red part of the bar is O&M. And these are all levelized cost of electricity. That fourth bar from the left is an H-frame, a normal H-frame combined cycle. Taking 285 gas, that'll produce power roughly at 4.4 cents. Airframes to the right, frame with carbon capture to the right of that, but now look at what happens once we have carbon capture. You add on a bunch of post-combustion carbon capture equipment, so your capital cost goes up, but now we start with a lower level because we've got a credit, that little black bar. That black bar is the credit for the sale of CO2. We're assuming only $15 a ton. But it's also the benefit of the 45Q tax credits. So you can see that that bar over there is 6.4 cents. And then what people don't fully realize is if you go farther to the right and you go into the renewables world, and if you go into renewables where intermittency is offset with gas backup, or you go to renewables world where the intermittency is offset with storage, you become more expensive. We know that. Now let's look at where net power is playing. If you look at the bar on the far left, notice as you go, that's serial number 1. The next bar over is serial number 5. The next bar over is serial number 30. In each one of those, the capital cost goes lower and lower. And we're actually using the same learning curve that you see on H-frames and other combined cycle power plants. We're using that same learning curve for serial number 1, 5, 30. Initially, we're producing power at 1.9 cents. That's with the CO2 sale at $15 a ton, the 45Q tax credit, the sale of argon at $300 a ton, and the sale of nitrogen at only $8 a ton. We can still get those benefits on serial number 5, where we drop below a penny, 24/7, below a penny. Serial number 30, nitrogen and argon markets are gone. But look where we are. Now, when we go beyond this and figure out where in the world we can implement this, we've actually been looking at 7 different sites as exemplary sites for different reasons. In the Middle East, there's a lot of sour gas. In the UK, there are different considerations there, and the UK has been a big supporter of ours. In North Dakota, we understand how this works in North Dakota. We've modeled this in North Dakota. We've modeled this in West Virginia. We've modeled this in Texas, and we've modeled it around Four Corners. And each one of those places are different. Some of them have CO2 markets, some of them don't. Some have nitrogen markets, some of them don't. Some of them allow us to use the CO2 to process sour gas. Sour gas is something that a lot of people haven't talked about. And I don't think a lot of people have thought about the way CO2 can be used for sour gas, although if you go to LaBarge, not too far away from here, you see ExxonMobil has their controlled freeze zone processing sour gas with heavy CO2 content. They're only able to do that process because of the heavy CO2 in their sour gas. When we look at the alternative of either doing CO2 for EOR at 1.5 barrels per ton, which is a low end of the yield, $70 a barrel oil, we can produce every year, we can fund the production, if you will, of our CO2 of $94 million worth of oil. Sour gas production, we think we can purify 94 MMBTU for every ton of CO2. That means for the sour gas world at 285 gas, you're talking about $238 million a year. So the swing between EOR and sour gas is sort of interesting. And we didn't fully realize this until people in the Middle East said, hey, can you help us with our sour gas? And we sort of stepped into it. Someone said, can you help us? And being the innovating types we are, we tried to help them, and we came up with some pretty interesting ways of using that CO2. What's the future forward? Now, what's the end game? The end game is this. First of all, we think that CCS doesn't ring viable to many people in this country. They don't know what it means. They don't know how important it is. They don't know, they're confused. There's a keep in the ground movement here. Where we think this goes, though, we think this goes to hydrogen. And we think we can use the heat from a net power plant to help make hydrogen using steam methane reforming. And that hydrogen cost will be about 73 cents a kilo with full carbon capture. So that's it. Thank you guys very much.